I'm delighted to welcome you here for this event today. We're talking about wellbeing and housing. We're talking about how we make better places, and I'm really delighted to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. I want to pay my respects to elders past and present of the Gadigal people and acknowledge that this land was never ceded. This space actually has historical resonance for the Committee for Sydney. Stockland have been our partner for our end-of-year drinks for probably about a decade now, and they used to be in this room. They're now at the Opera House, and many of you have been along. But you get a sense that, you know, this is a good reminder of the roots of the Committee for Sydney when we come back to this place. A lot of good memories in this space. But Stockland are good partners of the committee. Thank you for your support. We're going to be hearing more from them later. I also want to acknowledge, of course, we have the Minister in the room. You'll be hearing from the Minister shortly. But before that, what we're really here to talk about is the latest Byera Hadley, not Byera, but Byera, because it's Australia. Byera Hadley research by Georgina Blix, which explores the connection between housing design and mental health, which of course is very convenient when you have the Housing and Mental Health Minister in New South Wales. For over 70 years, the Byera Hadley Travelling Scholarship has supported architects, graduates and students from New South Wales to conduct global research. And Georgina Blix, the Director of Blix Architecture, is the latest, I think you're the latest, sorry, there you are. The latest Byera Hadley scholarship recipient, and we're going to be hearing from Georgina. Following that, we're going to be hearing from the Minister, and then we'll be having a panel discussion to talk about the intersection between wellbeing and housing. So with that, and with no further ado, I want to thank all of our partners. Stockland, you'll see here, but look, we do a lot of work in a lot of different areas. The Committee for Sydney's joy and wonder, and you know, what we really enjoy doing is those intersections, those Venn diagrams between complex and interesting challenges. And we work with a lot of partners across that area, whether it's in the resilience and climate change space, whether it's talking about Sydney's global brand and positioning in Sydney Global, whether it's thinking about density done well and the way that we design well-designed communities. I want to thank all of our partners in that space. And without any further ado, Georgina, give her a big round of applause.
All right, let's get started. I'd like to start by asking you today to remember a place that you absolutely loved as home, somewhere where your home was your castle. Who was there with you? What made it so special? Was it the perfect pool room? Maybe it was an experience in share housing when you were a student, or was it the people, neighbours and community that made it special? For our international friends watching this being filmed today, The Castle is an Australian classic film that we highly recommend. I actually met my neighbours in a false fire alarm. We were forced to meet in our pyjamas on the street, then became a hello at the lifts, later became Sunday dinners or helping with babysitting. Those neighbours are part of why I now feel safer, more connected and less lonely where I live. So when the Sydney Morning Herald asks about the cost, taxpayers or false fire alarms, I wonder if they're thinking about the social value of being forced to meet your neighbours in your pyjamas. In 2024, I set out on a Byera Hadley Travelling Scholarship to answer just that. Does wellbeing have a value? I completed 23 interviews with researchers, academics, policy advisors, heads of architecture schools, architects and social value practitioners across the US, Canada, UK, New Zealand and Austria to ask how we can design housing for wellbeing and to measure its value. Who we live with and how we interact with them is critical for both our individual wellbeing and that of our communities. Our neighbours are our closest form of social support and connection. Our neighbours are the first to respond in a crisis such as a fire or illness, and these daily types of interactions contribute to a sense of belonging and can be factors for building resilience in communities when things go wrong. It's clear that where you live is one of the strongest social determinants for mental health, including the availability of jobs, health and education, but also access to clean air, to green space, to recreation facilities. For vulnerable communities like women, children, and our elderly people, safety and social connection is a key priority. For all of us, home is where we form our strongest social bonds, where we work, we feel safe, and we build the foundations for life. In cities like Sydney, Auckland, Vancouver, Toronto, New York, and London, we actually all have the same challenges. One of housing affordability issues, combined with the highest rates of loneliness, particularly for youth and older generations. It's a worldwide challenge. In June of this year, the World Health Organization released a paper calling for urgent action around loneliness and social isolation. In 2023 of last year, the US Surgeon General called it an epidemic. And last year, the New South Wales government had an inquiry into loneliness. So with the challenges of antisocial behaviour and a national mental health crisis, is it enough for us just to build more housing, or do we need to be accountable to the impact our housing has on mental health? So let's start with the vision. I'm going to get us all to dream big. Let's say in 10 years, we've built all the housing we need. Okay, maybe more than 10 years. I'm a little bit optimistic. But more than that, we've invested the funds to design measures that improve our wellbeing outcomes. Our buildings are adaptable. They're cared for with pride, which is keeping our maintenance costs down. More than just ensuring our homes don't cause damage, we've got residents that feel like they're healing from trauma. Because of this approach, we've had the equivalent, if not higher, savings in our mental health departments, in our emergency department presentations. Our residents report that they feel safer, their participation rates in community events and volunteering is up. We've asked our residents, they report that they feel less lonely, and we have the data to prove it. So, is this just a fantasy, or is this the roadmap for where we should be heading with housing? One of the first steps on that pathway is accepting that good design is not necessarily enough to be designed for wellbeing. Like this Sydney bus stop, we may provide shelter, a place to rest, but what if, like the Innsbruck tram stop that I had the pleasure of visiting, we recognise that loneliness and mental health are actionable design items? Both of these designs meet our basic needs, but some designs go further to promote social connection in our everyday lives. Let's take, for example, a typical apartment housing corridor. This could be any project that we work on. It's wheelchair accessible, robust materials, A to G compliant. We've got windows, daylight, natural ventilation. But like most housing, it doesn't express who actually lives in this building, which is a key factor for belonging, place attachment, and trust in your neighbours. It's a start, but good design doesn't go far enough. The next project is by Shopworks Architects in Denver, who I had the pleasure of meeting, and they had studied the correlation between brain injury and homelessness, which was alarmingly high. These small niches at every front door allowed you to express your family, your values, celebrate a holiday or a festive season. Not to mention to help you find your own front door in a long corridor. It helps you to get to know your neighbours. So providing a window at the end of the corridor is no longer enough to claim that you support wellbeing. If you are serious about belonging being more than a buzzword, then we need intentional design ideas like these. Another common response to this research around wellbeing and housing is, well, that's just common sense. But common sense wouldn't continue to put laundries in basements in unsurveyed and unsafe areas, spaces fraught with antisocial behaviour, particularly experienced by women. Instead, this project by Shopworks Architecture puts the laundry right at the front door of crisis housing. So you have a safe place to watch your most precious possessions being washed, but also to socialise with your neighbours. This is a trauma-informed response. The laundry is reducing your triggers for trauma, but also becoming a social place to heal. Shopworks Architecture have even been a few more steps along this journey. They have created trauma-informed design guidelines, which now every social and affordable housing project in Denver needs to be held accountable to and respond to. So their design criteria for trauma have become part of policy. Common sense says we often provide the community room in our housing projects now. This is a communal open space in indoors or outdoors. In our New South Wales Apartment Design Guide mandates it. However, a common story we heard across the globe was that day one, the building manager comes in and locks the door to protect the furniture. It's a really common story, and it's only found out through post-occupancy interviews where they talk to the building manager and residents about why they're not using their communal spaces. In this project, David Baker Architects worked that out through their own post-occupancy evaluation process. They started to remove the third wall so that it could no longer be an enclosed or locked space. They started to create 3 or more reasons that you can use the communal space, like laundries, share work computer spaces, all of these ideas improving passive surveillance. Or in the case of the anecdote told to us by Shopworks Architecture, they noted a social affordable housing project where every single artwork was stolen within the first year. But every single piece was also returned by the end of the year. Once housing feels secure, the scarcity mindset of the residents is dialed down by consistent care and engagement in their housing. Residents can also buy into the value of that art. Behaviours do need time to adjust. So common sense builds with evidence, over time, and with empathy. Some of you might be thinking, well, that's just for me. I'm never going to use that communal open space. That is not something that I'm interested in. And that's okay. How many of you actually thought about that ideal castle in the first anecdote by yourself? How many of you are in complete isolation? If COVID has taught us anything, is that social connection is a part of our lives. So what we're trying to do in design here is to reduce loneliness by creating opportunities and choice. For you, it might be okay just to say hello at the lifts. For others, they might want to be able to build more long-term friendships and more complex social connections. So how do we build the evidence that design can influence wellbeing? Most of us understand when you enter a space like our beautiful opera house that you can feel something. You feel welcomed or safe. There might be clear expectations about how you are to behave. Design for wellbeing is about being intentional that that experience might be different if you're a woman arriving at night or if you have a history of trauma like incarceration. Is this awe-inspiring or is this intimidating and a barrier from actually participating? We know that wellbeing can be subjective, and we know that our priorities will change in every context. For example, here are 2 wellbeing frameworks, one of the many we were able to explore across the world. This on the further side is the trauma-informed framework, where they place safety at the core, and the second is for Maori and Pacific Islander culture, where they place family, community, and environmental wellbeing at the core of its decision-making. Culture and experience will shape your wellbeing. We need projects to have a clear framework on their priorities, informed by the people who will live there. So if wellbeing is subjective, are there common elements that most researchers agree impact our wellbeing? Yes. Most international examples will include ideas like spaces that are free from mould, that are warm with good airflow. It's expected, but actually quite difficult to achieve. Safety, comfort, and control are basic human needs. Connected, walkable communities are essential. Social connection to nature, and a sense of belonging is critical. So knowing that wellbeing is both universal and nuanced, we need design ideas that actually respond accordingly based on the evidence of what works. In this apartment entry in San Francisco by David Baker Architects, the entry is wide to avoid tailgating. So instead of entering off into a narrow standard corridor, you can look through a transparent, heavily locked and secure screen that makes you feel safe, and you can decide if it's safe to enter by seeing what's ahead. As you enter through the calming landscape, there's a communal barbecue area and a gym to meet neighbours, and the entry is surveyed by both treadmills and a share workspace. When we look at this project and plan, there is ground floor space that has been given over for physical health, social connection, passive surveillance, and an overall sense of safety. The street front has individual front doors and stoops to activate the street. The front entry is trauma-informed to feel safe. Yes, there is a cost associated with approximately 5 apartments that could have fit into that floor space. But the question is whether the value of that floor space has been balanced by residents reporting that they are less lonely and more connected to their neighbours, a reduction in antisocial behaviour and tailgating, women reporting that they feel safer arriving home at night, or maybe the loss of kilograms at the gym leading to lower cardiac events and ambulance call-outs. In contrast, this could be any project. I absolutely love this project, but it's a very common situation where we have communal open space that looks directly into an apartment. This lack of visual and acoustic privacy means that there is no way kids can play in this space. There is no way that you can have a conversation. So whilst we're ticking off that the space has been provided, yes, we've met our apartment design guide criteria, it doesn't take into account the evidence of what actually works around wellbeing. Privacy, acoustic design, overlooking passive surveillance and maintenance all play a role. Along with strategies that involve floor space, it's a really common response when we've been looking at this across the world to say, well, these ideas just cost too much. In this affordable housing project by Shopworks Architecture in Denver, they understood that blinds were critical for a sense of privacy, autonomy and control over your space. It helps you to sleep well if you're a child or a shift worker. As a single line item on a cost spreadsheet, the blinds will cost more. Shopworks have worked hard to find cost savings with increased efficiencies in their floor plates. They don't get more budget to do these wellbeing initiatives, they prioritise it within their existing budgets. But we also need to start measuring their wellbeing value. What if sleep deprivation reduces your ability to contribute to society? Or if sheets over the window contribute to a lower perceived quality of housing and a greater stigma for social housing? Our wellbeing doesn't fall neatly into build cost alone. The cost to society will cross government portfolios, and at the moment we don't provide blinds in all of our social and affordable housing projects. Measuring wellbeing allows us to make value decisions to prioritise ideas. In this Happy Homes Toolkit in the UK, they were asking residents what they anticipate will have the most impact on their wellbeing. Interestingly, most of them will pick natural light and a window in their kitchen over home size. So whilst a project manager can cost every item line by line, wellbeing can be prioritised. We also need to ask the cost of not taking action. If we know that 15 to 24-year-olds feel the least connected to the community and have the highest rates of loneliness, can we afford not to consider their specific needs as we design spaces in our community and our housing? Which family or government department will need to bear that cost? Can we measure objectively mental health impacts of good design? Yes, and there's lots of great projects around the world starting to do this. Projects like Norks in Toronto are working on this challenge. So Norks are apartments where 50% of the apartment building are naturally, just by happy accident, over 65 years old. They're naturally occurring retirement communities. In this building typology, they're looking at ways to support ageing in place, reducing loneliness, and streamlining healthcare services. They're partnering with a women's college hospital and a 5-year research project to objectively measure trips, falls, ambulance call-outs, social connection, and loneliness. But they're also looking at changing up the healthcare system. So instead of just having individual providers who spend half of their time driving in between buildings, what if we allocated 3 dedicated healthcare workers to support care-at-home packages for this building? Instead of driving, they are now building social connections and meaningful relationships with residents, improving their own wellbeing and their staff retention rates. It's reducing costs to the healthcare system by finding efficiencies and improving wellbeing for all. It's a win-win. The impact on wellbeing can definitely be measured in any project. Just ask the residents. Post-occupancy surveys for wellbeing should be standard. Even better than asking through a survey or a post-occupancy process which can get filed away in a drawer, how about a community wellbeing map that's live? In Canada, most cities now have a neighbourhood level of map where you can measure tree cover, healthy food outlets, and open space. And Wales is working with a public map platform led by Professor Flora Samuel from Cambridge University under their Future Generations Act to get communities, including kids, to map and be social scientists, mapping places of joy, positive memories, and social connection, which can then be overlaid with census data. It's live and it's democratic. Wellbeing is both a process and an outcome. We need development programs to meaningfully engage with those with lived experience to be part of co-creating the wellbeing and vision that they want within their housing. From having women's workshops to exploring safety in our communities to co-design and ongoing engagement, people need to feel in control and sense of belonging by helping to create their own communities. The ultimate projects will consider wellbeing with a vision set by their community. They'll design for it with active ideas, they'll measure the impact, share the findings, tweak it if it's not working, and help to update policy. In the city North Vancouver, they have active design guidelines that provided GFA incentives for developers that include design features such as supporting active use, so staircases that have good natural light and are more easily accessible, and social connection. So any space that's there to promote social connection can be a GFA exclusion. It's a policy that was later assessed by Happy Cities across 14 buildings across the city, and they've been said to have a very positive impact not only on wellbeing, but with positive feedback from developers and residents alike. Rating tools like Well or Fitwell will help push expectations of those claiming wellbeing. Policies like Better Placed or our own apartment design guide, which is amazing, can be bolstered by wellbeing research to ensure that more than just a fluff word or wellbeing washing, we are now having action to match policy and intentions, and we're measuring to make sure that just the provision of the space is actually backed by evidence that the space is working. My final call for those who are saying, well, I'm going to wait to see what the evidence says and what I should do. The evidence is out there that we need to take action for mental health and loneliness. It's already there. But if you're wanting to know which idea has the biggest bang for your buck, then we need you to test that. Let's try every idea. Let's use every project as an experiment and test and measure what actually works. As we collectively work towards a society that supports mental health, let's share the findings and all step up. So my challenge to you is, what if we were all experimental scientists and every building was an experiment? Imagine a world where community sets their wellbeing priorities, where common sense comes from measurable data, and where our designs can start to be part of the solution for loneliness and the mental health crisis. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to all of the international colleagues who shared their information so willingly and freely for this scholarship. Thank you to the New South Wales Board of Architects for the scholarship opportunity, which has been a game changer. And finally, if you'd like, you can download the report along with the 300 people from around the world that have already done so, and keep the conversation going. I can't wait to see what castles we can all build.
Thanks so much, Georgina. I'm now going to invite the Minister for Homelessness, Housing, can I do this off the top of my head? Mental health, water and youth to give us a few insights before we go into our panel discussion. Thank you.
I wanted to start by saying thank you so much to Georgina for that really, really thought-provoking and interesting and challenging presentation. I certainly got a hell of a lot out of it. And you are right to say that, you know, delivering the housing that we need, the roof over the head, is a core priority for the New South Wales government. I hope that everyone, you know, has at least kind of got the message that the delivery of housing, and in particular from my point of view, social and affordable housing, is one of our top agenda items. But you're also right to say that if our aspiration is just a roof over someone's head, we've set our expectations and our standards very, very low. I mean, that should be the baseline. That's an important thing for us to prioritise, but we have the potential to do so much more. The fact that I'm the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Mental Health is, of course, a happy accident. There's no real rhyme or reason for that, but I'm going to absolutely lean into the fact that that intersection provides a really great opportunity for us to not just deliver the housing that we need, but to make sure that that housing provides the platform for the kind of opportunities that we would hope social housing can unlock for people. So I think it's not just a prospective vision that we have, recognising that we have thousands of people waiting for social housing, hundreds of thousands of people currently living in social housing, and if we're honest with ourselves, a social housing stock that does not meet the kind of wellbeing aspirations that you have described, and therefore is holding people back, is not giving them that platform and that opportunity to really unlock their potential, because everyone here who has visited our current social housing stock would know that they're often very grim places, very depressing places, and on occasion very ugly places. That we need to do a lot more to try and transform the potential of social housing to unlock those opportunities. But it's not just that prospective thing. You mentioned in your presentation as well, people come to us with trauma. They come to us when they're needing public and social housing with experiences of domestic and family violence, with experiences of substance abuse, with experiences of mental health. So that's what they bring when they're walking through the door. And are our places and our housing providing an opportunity for the kind of well-being and recovery journey that we would hope? And again, the reality is often that's not the case. There are plenty of examples of where we're doing good things and we're doing better, and I'm happy to talk about them in the panel. But I think if we accept that the baseline of a roof over someone's head is where we're currently setting our standards, but that is a standard that is too low, and we need to lift our vision. I think this is incredibly useful and exciting research to try and inform the future delivery pipeline that we have. And as everyone in this room, I hope would know, that's a pipeline that's backed by $5.1 billion of new money. So this isn't just theoretical for us. We actually have put the money in the budget to deliver the housing. Great, as you say, that's the first tick. But how can we make sure that that $5.1 billion unlocks billions of dollars more in terms of the kind of savings that are potentially there if we get the wellbeing elements right? I mean, I think, you know, underlying all of this is we recognise that as we talk about confronting the housing crisis, we talk about the urgency of delivering more housing. There's a really important social licence there. It cannot just be the delivery of more ugly shit boxes. We have to make sure that as we're delivering that housing, it is quality housing that has wellbeing principles deeply baked within it. I mean, everyone probably in this room, being the kind of gathering that it is, would know that Winston Churchill quote, you know, we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. Well, we're in the building shaping part of that project in New South Wales. There's a lot of building happening. There's a lot of money and enthusiasm for shaping our buildings. But we do have to think ahead about how in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, those buildings that we deliver now will shape us, will shape our communities. Are we making the right choices in terms of, yes, a real drive to deliver more housing, in particular more social and affordable housing, but making those early choices right now about how we can ensure that the communities that we're building as part of that project meet the aspirations that we know are possible for the people that live in them. So thank you so much for that research. It's incredibly informative and really looking forward to working with you and with people who are committed to this type of work as we deliver the housing that we know we desperately need.
Question is, I might start with you, Georgina, and then we'll go across. Here we go. And it's, let's imagine a dream scenario where you had 5%, let's say, or even 1% of all budget to spend on wellbeing, an initiative, idea, policy or process in your next social, affordable or even market housing project. What would you spend it on and why?
I'll answer as the architect. So I would definitely spend it at the front door. I think the front door is often a pace of alone decision making inherently happening, so trauma affects whether or not you want to enter a space, but it's also that interface between public and private.
I'm really pleased to be here talking about social determinants and mental health. Such an important conversation. But I'd say we need to concentrate our efforts on those who need it most, the most disadvantaged and the most impacted. If you'll indulge me for a minute, I've got some of our own stats. So the Mental Health Commission is an independent body. One of our roles is to monitor and review the mental health and wellbeing of the people of New South Wales. One of the ways that we have a range of indicators on our website, but one of the other ways is an annual community wellbeing survey. And so I've got some other interesting facts I'd just like to throw out there. And so these are results from 2023, and you're kind of linking psychological distress to a range of different issues. So housing stability is one of those things that impacts people's mental health, in particular knowing where you're going to live for the next 12 months or more. And those who are renting and on short-term contracts more seriously impact. Community involvement, 57% of people not involved in some kind of community group, but those who are feel the positive impacts on their mental health. Of course, loneliness, we know, we've heard a lot about loneliness. Our survey would say that went up 10% in that year. Interesting living situation can cause psychological distress too. So living with other relatives apart from your immediate family, people who are not your relatives, complex living circumstances, those living away, and single parents with children at home. And I could go on about physical exercise and the finances of this. And I think finance is really closely linked to it. And we know that that can have a negative impact on people's mental health. But one of the interesting stats from our survey was that 60% of people said they need to make sacrifices if they needed to fund something in an emergency. So my 5% would go to those that most need it and those that are most impacted.
Thank you. There's also those stats are a really good reminder for all of the environment practitioners in the room that, you know, like the Minister spoke, for the city that we today really impacts people's mental health as well. So,
look, it's interesting because Stockland also does. We do an annual livability survey across our residential communities, and we get similar feedback on what is wellbeing and how do we contribute to wellbeing. And it's all about connection and belonging. That's the number one driver that our residents consistently tell us. So thinking about Georgina's comments as well about that front door, it's about the public domain and shared spaces and places where the public and private intersect. Those are critical opportunities for people to build that belonging, connection, social ties. Building that social capital is really critical. So how do we build that into our design? So, you know, we have that evidence, and our communities are consistently telling us, and the data that we receive. And also we see it in a lot of our projects are long-term projects. We're with community for a long time. So we see it and we hear it from them. I think that also that point on community, that we're always collaborating with community. So we be looking at what does community mean? How do we spend that money being led by a community?
It's fraught in a way because, you know, to list is to limit. So I am going to name one, but please don't think that that means that anything else that's been said or any of the other ideas wouldn't also be things that I'd love to invest more money in. I'm going to go with blinds because Georgina mentioned it and it is just such a constant source of frustration to me. Matt who's my Director of Policy, sitting at the front, he's smirking, because every single time we go to social housing, and we visit a lot, I really make it part of my role to get out there. That's why, I can talk honestly and sometimes, in a challenging way about the existing stock we have. It shits me to tears that we've got the sheets over the windows, the broken windows, and I always say, why can't we fund blinds? And look, hey, well, why can't we? That's a question that we should ask ourselves. Yes, we've got a lot of other things that we need to fund. It's all very challenging, but it is constantly on my radar that we should be looking at ways to fund blinds for our tenants, not just because of the privacy and all of the, the sleep impacts and the things that you have mentioned for the individual living in that property, but yes, also the fact that our buildings, particularly our more dense buildings, have those alternatives to blinds that pop up when you do not provide them. Sheets, cardboard boxes, planks of wood, whatever it is I think a contributor to some of the wellbeing challenges that we often see in those communities. So if I had to pick one of the many, I'd say blinds.
So I love that, because sometimes it is the smallest thing that transforms your whole living experience. Now we're going to go really big picture. This is to the Minister and also to Mental Health Commissioner. From your experience in housing delivery or the Mental Health Commission, this is a big question, what are the biggest challenges in social and affordable housing? The second part is, do you have an example where a mixture of design and policy has improved wellbeing outcomes?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I'd say the biggest challenge is, one, we don't have enough. As I said, the baseline is roof over their head, and I kind of tried to claim that we're meeting that. We're not. We have 60,000 people on our waiting list. So the biggest challenge is we do not have enough social and affordable housing. But second to that is the fact that the stock that we do have is not meeting the needs of the people who live in it. So we don't have enough. What we do have, is not, as I said, I think necessarily providing the kind of opportunities for our tenants to reach their full potential for a range of reasons that Georgina has outlined and I've mentioned too. So those are the challenges. There's a lot under them, but those are the headlines. As I mentioned, there are a lot of examples of things that we are trying to do and that are working well. I'll just mention one. We want to keep the conversation going. We're leaning more and more into both just activating design elements and putting policy and resources behind the green space in the community gardens. And I see Andrew here from Link Wentworth. They have done an amazing piece of work at an estate that I visited in Eastwood. We've done something at the Northcott estate in Surrey Hills, where we've turned what were previously neglected, overgrown, messy public and green spaces into active community gardens. And that required resources. Those things don't just happen, but we lent into doing that. And then we've continued to maintain them, because of course one of the things that was also mentioned is, great, you do that once, the Minister comes out, it looks all shiny, literally a month later it's a mess again. So we've done it and then we've resourced it. That's just one example of where we are trying to recognise that those community gardens, those green spaces, tick so many boxes. Of course, shared spaces that are owned by the tenants. Of course, we know the benefits of getting out, getting your hands in dirt, in nature, etc. So those kind of things are happening and they are incredibly positive, but as I said, there's also a hell of a lot of work to do to scale that across our whole stock.
Well, I'm not really a housing expert, but what I would say is I don't think this is housing's problem alone. That we absolutely need a whole of government approach to this. It's just because there's so many interconnected factors here that we need to think about. And like the Minister said, just putting housing up isn't enough. We need to support people who are vulnerable to sustain their tenancies. I really love that we're talking about social connection as part of this and the whole loneliness thing, because we've been talking about that in health for quite a long time, about how do we connect people to community, and there's a whole movement around social prescribing about actually getting people much more connected with their communities. And so I'd like to see those conversations crossing paths to see how we can connect those. And I think the Commission has a role in that. There's one other thing, but I think it's about not one size fits all. And particularly in my visits to regional centres and regional and remote communities, not everything's going to be fixed through a new build. we actually have to look at communities and how we connect communities up together. And we need to talk to people in those priority populations, I would call them, and actually design things that work for them so that they work.
Sophie, I'm going to go to you. Obviously, Stockland works on a lot of housing projects across the state, and Autumnly is an exciting new project as well, collaborating with Going to New South Wales. How does Stockland deliver wellbeing for the community across your diverse projects, and how do you incorporate it into the design process from the beginning?
Look, Stockland really sees itself as creators and curators of connected communities, and because, as I spoke earlier about, that's where we see wellbeing come through, is when people feel like connected and belonging to their community. So we have a very place-based approach, which means it's tailored for the project. It starts off with a deep understanding of what is the place and what is the community. And then we leverage our social impact by design framework, which is all about understanding what's the needs of the local community, really collaborating with the local community, and then also using a social IQ tool to help us prioritise what's going to deliver the most social value. So that's really from a strategic point of view, but again, really collaborating with the community, because community is the expert, and we're going to unearth opportunities or solutions that otherwise we would not have. We are also, from a design point of view, we are really prioritising things like inclusion, safety, and connection, and also quality, because as we saw with Georgina's slides, all of that is about thought and understanding of how do people move through spaces, how do they use spaces, and what is their own particular lived experience. We also have a livability survey, which also comes back and tells us that voice of community. How are we going? What's important to them? What do we need to pay more attention to? So it works on several different levels, from the strategic to also the tactical. But it is something that is sort of built into the DNA of what we do. We are with our communities for a long time. Often some of our projects are 20-year projects. So we have that relationship, ongoing relationship with community, which is so important, and it's a partnership.
Okay, I'll ask one more question and then it'll be over to you. So start marinating on what you'd like to ask. I think I'll start with Jennifer, but also just open them up to everyone, which is, why is building evidence base on what works for wellbeing so important for the Mental Health Commission or for the work that we'll do? And I think, Georgina, in your slides, you spoke a lot about post-occupancy reviews, and I don't see a lot of that data collection happening in New South Wales. But, once we build that evidence, obviously there's benefits and we can figure out what works and what doesn't. And I guess my 2 cents on that is maybe we need to be more open to things not working. But who wants to start with the importance of evidence?
Oh, well, probably just to talk a little bit about the role of the Mental Health Commission. We're in the process of developing a 10-year strategy for the mental health and wellbeing of the people of New South Wales, so the evidence is really important for that. But we're doing a really broad consultation. We've brought every government department to the table to have this conversation, which I think is a start. And really trying to seek to understand what works well in their particular portfolios. The Commissioners having a role in connecting up some of those synergies so that we can leverage off each other. I think it's also really important to look at what happens internationally and what might be useful in this context. And I really like some of your stories that you told about what you found, because I think there's some really rich information there that we need to tap into.
Go, Georgina, and then we'll meet Mr. Mannion.
Yeah, post-occupancy evaluation is a really tricky one, and I thought when I very first started this research journey that I would solve that one, and I've now learned that it's near impossible. Asking architects or to developers to measure whether their projects worked is fraught with a hard challenge, or even a government to ask them to measure their own efficacy. That's near impossible. Funding for it has been very difficult, and then in certain contexts when we spoke to people in the US or even in Canada, like you said, the fear of if I've got the data saying that something isn't working, am I liable for that? So from an insurance perspective, there needs to be insurers on the table saying that, yes, we're willing for experimentation that happens a lot more freely in the scientific community, where you're allowed to put a hypothesis up, test if it works, and then come back with the results. We don't have that so much in built form, in part because it's there for so long as it builds stock, but also because we tend to build it and walk away from it. So adaptability, how it changes over time, doesn't come into it. So there's a lot of challenges there, but we do need evidence.
I mean, I would agree with that entirely. I mean, the one difference from a government perspective is that we don't walk away. You know, I mean, we own, I mean, you talk about being with communities for a long time. I mean, our stock, you know, much of it, unfortunately, has been in our hands for decades and decades and decades, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't meet our modern aspirations in terms of design and well-being. The one thing I would say, just agree with everything else, is, you know, challenging what evidence is. You know, you mentioned it, Georgina, so I know that, you know, you completely agree with this. Listening to tenants, they're not necessarily people who would necessarily wear an expert hat. It's not a desktop review, that's not a literature analysis. That is incredibly rich and valuable evidence. And so when we talk about being evidence-led, we're actually doing what you're saying as well, Sophie, which is just being community-led. That's the evidence. And I find that so much. Everyone here who's worked in social and affordable housing would know this too. When you go and you talk to residents about the things that are top of their mind, the evidence that they are providing you in the form of their lived experience as tenants is so rich and so valuable. And so being very, very open to platforming that, not just as anecdote, not just as complaining, not just as, letters to the minister, not just as, that's evidence, and that's the way we should treat it and listen to it and respect it.
Thank you. And Bill Campbell's from Marcy Light. I just don't want to share this evidence of judging. It's not hesitant about that just yet, but I did research many years ago regarding what protected pay is for, the mental health and well-being. That usually is 3-generation loan. And usually what we find, particularly in third world countries where they don't have resources to build properties, having incentives to have a 3-generation loan supports the ability of actually reducing costs of the community and government. So I'm just wondering whether there's ability forward about what are policy drivers to increase that ability for people to choose to have 3-generation home.
I mean, the only thing I would add, it's nice to see you, Bill, is one of the things that we are looking to do in our social housing stock, and it's interestingly not motivated in the way that you have articulated it. We would talk about it in terms of managing overcrowding and some of those issues that we might have in some of our stock, is leaning into our new work in modular housing to provide modular houses on bigger blocks to provide space for multi-generation within the block. So it's not exactly what you have articulated, and it's really interesting for me to hear that research. I'd be keen to follow up with you on it. But we have acknowledged that, particularly for some of our First Nations families, multi-generation family within the block is very important. So you've got grandparents, mum and dad and kids. If the house itself is not big enough for that, is not built for that, doesn't have the kind of quality to sustain that, we can deliver a modular studio or small unit on the block, often particularly in our regional areas, our blocks are massive, to support that space without necessarily people having to kind of be all on top of each other and some of the challenges that can create. So I think that's one way that, in a roundabout kind of way, we're trying to meet that need, but also balance the fact that our historic stock certainly was not built with that in mind, and, you know, modifying that over time is a challenge.
Sure, no.
Yeah, it was a big topic, particularly in New Zealand and in Vancouver as well. It is a global challenge as well with intergenerational design. So two parts to it. One is within the community itself. So there's a lot of projects looking at how, instead of segregating childcare, seniors living and housing in 3 separate portfolios, and start to come together in community spaces, so the same building you'll have all 3 functions. And then down to the apartment level, there's a fantastic project we visited in Vancouver that had an interconnecting studio apartment that was connected to a 2-bed apartment to allow for flexibility. The challenge with that is always, how do you find the right tenants for that flexible apartment type, because it changes at a time. And even your needs within your family changes. If, let's say, your parents are passed away, that you don't need that studio, does it become a studio again, or do you leave it as interconnected tenancy for a future family? So there's been a lot of mystique happening, which I'd love to see, but yeah, I don't think we had a right solution just yet.
Excellent. Where did the lady in the blue jacket? Sorry.
Thank you, and thank you, Georgina, for sharing your research. My name's Johanna Fitman, and I'm with the Groundswell Foundation. We've just completed some research on youth loneliness, and I was really interested to see your slide about how designing for young people, and given the high rates of loneliness amongst young people. But it showed a skateboarder. And if I think about all the young people I know, none of them are skateboarders. And I'm wondering about piloting designs and designs that encourage and attract young people to connect, and if there's any other examples you came across.
Yeah, great point. And I think it comes down to the idea of that, your 14 to 24-year-olds are not a homogenous single group. It's about choices. So I think for some, having, I know, for example, down in Manly, the skate park is a community hub for people there, all generations, using those facilities. What we often tend to do with facilities that are specifically designed for that age group is that we put it to the very edge of community, or in the underpass, or on the low surveyed area, and then we're surprised when there's poor social outcomes from it. If you put those spaces in the heart and then provide choices so that there's community spaces for gaming, for arts, as well as for sports and physical activity, and they're all the centre of your community space. They don't feel as a cohort who are really disconnected from community, that they're acting out their lives in the periphery of society, that really should be in the heart of every community.
I think it's a really interesting point. Often that cohort gets forgotten, and remember, families, grow up. They might start off as 5-year-olds, but they end up as 18, 20-year-olds. So we really have to be thinking about who are all the different users that are part of our community, and how do we provide things for them. I think it's about it's not just about the skate park, it's about a whole lot of things, a whole lot of different activities. And there's been some very interesting work starting to look at young women and girls, and also making sure we're providing things for them. So it's really understanding the diverse needs. There's no one kind of fit. We need to be thinking about all the different users, from young kids to older people to teenagers. So we are totally inclusive.
Oh, I mean, look, all I would say is I agree. I mean, often the child-friendly design is a playground, and the tweens and the teenagers are often forgotten in particularly the design elements. I could not agree more about, the only answer is just ask them, what do you want? If some community members are calling for a skate park or something like that, fantastic. But I mean, I very much agree with you. Certainly not all of them. I mean, my 13-year-old's got no interest in that sort of thing. She's a drama kid. So the only answer is ask them. And again, when we're talking about, the evidence and the consultation, they are not the cohort that will just turn up when you say, hey, tenants, come and tell us what kind of things you want in our design. They're not, you have to go to them. It's not enough to say, oh, well, no teenagers showed up. So, well, we're not really sure what they want. It's got to be a proactive and resourced engagement with them to try and bring them in. And so I think that's, again, something that we don't necessarily do well. But I would say, putting my youth minister hat on, we've recently launched the New South Wales Office for Youth. So we now have a single agency within the New South Wales government to platform and prioritise youth voices. And certainly this type of engagement is something that is going to be central to the work of that new agency. Just change my hats all the time.
I might actually also quickly add to that. So I've done a Tertium Fellowship looking at how to design better use of women and girls, and the skate park or young girls, young boys issue comes up a lot. And some research with people I met with in Yorkshire showed that boys necessarily don't want skate parks either, and they were asking them. And that's actually what brought in common. It was about having access and connection to nature play or at different forces. And one thing I always remember is everyone just wants trampolines in the ground and that physical movement that you can have with your friends and be social. That's so. Next question. You gotta find it, could I? You've got a mic. Oh, sorry.
Kip Turnbull from Bedwatch, Bedford Wellbeing. The Minister mentioned that the cohort that were coming into public house were already coming in with many disadvantages and issues that impact costs overall. So I'd be interested to know whether the work that you've done, you've looked at situations where there is that reliability of capacity to it as well as the delivery. And connect that, I guess, it's the question about what role we list as the Housing and Mental Health Accord play in terms of making sure that the delivery of services are made effectively to people in public housing.
Oh, no, I think I'd love to hear from you, Georgina, about,
Yeah, I mean, the best experience I think was Shopworks Architecture in Denver, who came up with the idea that of a trauma-informed design framework. They really were the pioneers of that, and they have multiple levels to that design guideline. And it starts with don't do war harm, so do not trigger the trauma response, that flight or fright response. We don't want that when we enter into our housing model. So they do a lot of beautiful, simple design ideas about entering safety. Our residents report they want to see security measures that makes them feel safe entering. I thought it would be a deterrent because it's so obviously locked, but no, that was a great aspect. So lots of consultation and working out what is reducing a trauma response. But going beyond that, I think to healing, I think that comes from housing security, from knowing where you're going to live for 12 months. The social connection aspect is a big determinant for healing, so that you've got people with a similar lived experience with you in those housing floors and having spaces to learn from them. They've also done a lot of work around support services provision. So if you're getting support with food services or work, employment opportunities, those services have space within the housing, so that you can have those informal chats, not in a scary, tucked away meeting room where it feels very formally to go into an office. It's right there in your home with the childcare right next to it. It's really thought about the lived experience of these people and how to create a supportive environment.
Thanks. Hi, Citizen Kamara. Probably question me to Sophie, but can to everyone else. So we'll talk about design for people that will live in the social housing, and touching on the Commissioner's comment that not one size fits all. How do you feed people's needs and lived experiences into your design, especially early on in your design? As I think you get mortgaged by as people that are living there have these systems it. And if you ask for too late of a deadline, you're actually just asking to validate your design. You're not actually embed.
Look, absolutely. I think it's critical to have that community involvement engagement at early stages, and that is what we're doing at Wellbeing, because we're really listening and understanding what are the needs, what are the requirements, how do we actually build on what's loved, but also shape the future with the community. So it is one of our primary objectives. We are also working in partnership with our City West Housing, I'm going to fluff it up now, but Ferriby and also Lee Wentworth, and they are experts and they are living with their community and they are engaged with their community. So and I was just talking to our partners earlier to say, this is pretty exciting because there's so much for us to cross-collaborate on and to learn from one another, but they are sitting side by side, their community from day one, and learning. And you talked about post-occupancy evaluations. That is the business that we are in. We are constantly learning and improving and getting better from asking our community and working with them.
I mean, I would just add, it critically important in Waterloo, also two other estates that we're redeveloping or have redevelopment pipelines for. One is Bellambi down in the Illawarra area, and the other one is the Argyle estate in Coffs Harbour, where we have completely flipped on its head the way that Homes New South Wales and the New South Wales government does community consultation. It used to be very much the case that we would just present designs and kind of require people to agree or not, but it was absolute ticker-box consultation. People would often find out that they would need to relocate from their homes to support redevelopment by reading it in the newspaper. You know, a whole range of very, very poor engagements. We've really listened to research that's been done by Shelter, by the Tenants Union, by a range of experts who speak for tenants as well as engaging with them themselves to completely flip that, as you say, bring those conversations right up front. In Waterloo, it's very important because we are asking some tenants to relocate. You know, there is a it's within the local community, but we want that to be done in an incredibly supported way to meet our aspirations for giving them dignity and ownership, but also to meet our aspirations for delivering hundreds more social and affordable houses well designed in that space. So it's really important to us to get that right. It has been done poorly by the New South Wales government in the past, and we've really, really focused on reorienting those conversations. And the one thing I would say, it's a bit like, so it takes more time. And we have to be conscious of that, because you can see my urgency. I am absolutely desperate to get housing delivered. But to do that and to not just pay lip service to that, it takes more time. And so you have to build that time in, acknowledge it, make sure that from your project plans from day one, that time is factored in, because it's just not something that can be rushed. So again, that's just an acknowledgement that we have to have, and something that we've reflected on in terms of our delivery timeframes.
Thank you.
I just also say, it's a key to success.
Yeah.
It's an absolute key.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to wrap. So I'll start by thanking, of course, the Minister for her time, all of the panellists, Georgina for the excellent presentation, Heaps Stockland, of course, for hosting us, and grab some food on the way out. Is there's plenty? Thank you.